So are you suggesting then that this brain chemistry of people drawn to crack and cocaine is similar to those drawn to caffeine and nicotine?
Oh, especially to caffeine. The primary role of caffeine is to stimulate us. That's fun. It's exciting. So we have a big burst of energy with that catecholamine hit. We're not just talking about coffee anymore. Artificial caffeine. Sugar has a violent effect on all of the neurotransmitters. How does that compare with nicotine? It's one of the most addictive drugs. The primary negative is malnutrition.
Are some of us just born with a personality more prone to addiction? Are we going to have withdrawals?
It's tragic, but we've got the answer.
Yes.
If you don't have enough of norepinephrine, your ability to focus, concentrate, it's about mental energy as well as physical energy.
Your work for me is one of the most important things. It helps us realize we deserve to feel good, right? And if we don't, we also deserve the tools to know how to help ourselves. Where exactly do we begin? Is the person who drinks 1 or 2 cups of coffee in the morning as opposed to someone who has a more significant habit? 1 in 5 people around the world today smoke, and almost everyone over 65 uses caffeine. Many of us in America use so much caffeine that we would actually qualify for a chemical dependence. Now, I know when it comes to caffeine, there can be benefits, but there's also a lot of detriments when it negatively impacts the quality of your sleep, maybe your mood. I know a lot of you have reached out wanting Julia Ross's efforts and education around naturally treating nicotine and caffeine addiction. And so that's what this episode is going to be about, because it's not a personal failure. It's not a willpower issue. Your brain is starving. It's depleted. And we're going to tell you how to bring those nutrients back so that you can move away from any substance that's negatively impacting you. And I know this well because I was a smoker. I was a young ballerina. I was taught to smoke when I was 15 years old. And I did that for a very long time until I became a fitness trainer and a yoga instructor, and that didn't seem to align anymore. And so then I developed a really intense caffeine habit. And I'll tell you how that ended. I crashed and burned, and I had to learn how to get off of it. And Julia's been so incredibly helpful. So welcome to the show, Julia. I couldn't be more excited to have you.
Well, I'm excited too.
So tell us, we are going to dive into all that you need to know about how to get rid of nicotine in your life and caffeine in your life. And there's actually some interesting brain chemistry about them. So what does a nicotine or a caffeine addiction tell us about our brains? How are they the same and how might they be different?
Well, in the old days, let's say prior to 1980s, they were significantly different. And in some ways they still are. So caffeine from a lovely plant, like all of these addictive herbs that we thought were safe to begin with and totally positive, really impacts one part of the brain, one part of the 5-part system that regulates our moods and our appetites. So that part of the system is actually a little family of stimulating neurotransmitters. We call them the cats, but for short, the trio is called catecholamine, and its most famous component is dopamine. But the actual prime actor is norepinephrine, which is our natural stimulant, pure and simple. The final cat of the trio is adrenaline. So again, highly stimulating, but on the negative side. Dopamine doesn't have much of a conscious impact. Norepinephrine has big impact, and that's what caffeine is really targeting, is our norepinephrine. The primary role of caffeine is to stimulate us, and that's fun. It's exciting. But when we end up consuming caffeine throughout the day and into the evening, then we start seeing the negatives. And interestingly enough, the primary negative is malnutrition. So how does caffeine cause neurotransmitter malnutrition by destroying our appetite. So when we started to really get serious about coffee as, a single experience, not part of breakfast. When it was part of breakfast, we were fine, but it's now substituting for breakfast. And this is where the increased addictiveness comes in. The more we do a Starbucks instead of a cup of black coffee, even with a teaspoonful of sugar and some cream, we are multiplying the addictive effects across all of the neurotransmitters, because sugar has been added to such an extent, and sugar has a violent effect on all of the neurotransmitters. So we have a big burst of energy with that catecholamine hit, and then we have all the other neurotransmitters lighting up as well. So the addictive component, it multiplies. Now, you were saying, how does that compare with nicotine? Well, nicotine from the start, another herb, was able to impact many neurotransmitters. So we have people who smoke for pleasure. We have people who smoke for energy. We have people who smoke to calm down. And we have people who smoke instead of eat. What you were talking about, ballerinas, that's the name of the game. Congratulations for surviving that, by the way.
I'm realizing there were a lot of repercussions that I'm healing even today. So thank you. Your work's been, invaluable for that.
Well, we'll get to the solutions in a minute, but let me just make one more point, and that is tobacco got into big trouble and ended up having to pay billions of dollars in restitution to the state of Arkansas to compensate for all of the pulmonary cancers that the state had paid for treatment for. So what did they find that was really the key to the culpability? That was that their addition of sugar, once again, to manipulation of sugar combined with the plant, with the tobacco plant, was what was making it so addictive. And so we end up now with two very different substances consumed in very different ways, substituting for the food that we need desperately, and we need it coming in full of protein, not once a day, not twice a day, but 3 times a day at least. Without that, we can't make our own natural energy. We can't make our own natural pleasure. None of the neurotransmitters can operate fully, which means we become progressively more dependent on drug-like foods to give us temporary neurotransmitter surges.
Beautifully stated, Julia. I love that. And we're not only talking about coffee, energy drinks, right? More kids are drinking it. Oh, it's so scary. And diet soda. So many people are addicted to the diet soda and nicotine, and there's vaping.
So we're really talking about caffeine, not coffee.
Yes, caffeine, not coffee.
Okay.
But caffeine in coffee.
Yeah. And in energy drinks and whatever, yeah.
Yeah. So this is a big issue that can negatively impact your sleep, right? Like I said, people are irritable and aggressive when they have too much caffeine. It can change their personality. I remember crumpling up and at the end of every day crying. And once I got rid of caffeine, that went away. And I was overriding my body's natural feedback, which is like you're speaking about. Rather than feeling hungry, we get that energy instead. And then we do more than we probably should. And then we deplete ourselves.
Well, then we crash. And this is another key that helps us understand which nutrients we're going to need to restore the problem. So when we've skipped the meals, when we've run on false energy, we have a crash. And it's called hypoglycemia. So the blood sugar level critically in the brain is very fragile. There's no place to store sugar like there is in the muscle. So when we run out of, a current diet of healthy food, the brain feels it quickly and it just doesn't function well. And that compounds the addictiveness of these substances, because then we need it again to give us a false stimulation of glucose.
Exactly. It's a Band-Aid, right? It's a Band-Aid, and you putting it on every single day, rather than what we're going to teach you is to build up your body, build up and replenish those neurotransmitter and amino acid stores so that you can feel the way that you're supposed to feel, maybe for the first time. Because as Julia's work has helped me understand, some of us are just born with this genetic depleted brain chemistry that then we get the opportunity to learn how to correct. And that's why we're here. So tell us, Julia, what do you think about the notion of simply an addictive personality? Are some of us just more prone to addiction, or is there another element at play here?
I wish I could say there was an addictive personality or a psychological reason that drives us to addiction, that as a primary cause. And I was originally trained in clinical psychology. I assumed that, family history, and, early childhood problems were going to need to be addressed, and that was going to be magic. The cravings would go. We don't need a false sense of pleasure because we're not in chronic pain anymore psychologically. But we gave it everything we had. When I came into the addiction treatment business, I was actually still in the graduate program in clinical psychology, and I was, really a master of all these new techniques. And our clients were so excited by it. I'll talk about the program that I was working in originally, but we got about 60% sticking around and staying sober. These were all alcoholic men. But as we'll talk about later, as soon as crack came, we realized that we were really on thin ice, that the psychological techniques really, they had something to offer, but it wasn't nearly enough compared to the brain chemistry problems that have just overwhelmed us ever since.
Yeah. And Julia, take us there. So, and you talk about in your book this study that I love to highlight. It was, I guess, a 40-year study where they looked at 600 different men, and it was from Harvard, and they found out that there wasn't an addictive personality. And like you're saying, your work has unearthed, it's this depleted biochemistry that we are exacerbating now based on our diet, but that some of us are simply born with too. So it's just like both of these factors like coming together to create our experience of life that is just less joyful, less contented, less peaceful than I think we're supposed to feel. So Julia, tell us, what brought you into this field of using amino acids to begin with? You're a legend in this space, and people, this is part 3. If you don't know, we've done other episodes on depression and drug addiction. And so this is part 3, and we're going to continue a series, but tell everybody about your extensive history and what brought you into this field to begin with.
Well, what brought me in was I needed an income while I was in graduate school. My student loans had run out, and the large residential long-term treatment program for alcoholic men was the only program in the city of San Francisco that offered a stipend. So I wasn't particularly interested in addiction. I was afraid of it. And the truth is that we didn't get much training specifically in addiction. But as soon as I started working with people and using the techniques that I've been learning, they were so responsive. They loved it. People from the community heard about it, and they started wanting us to do outpatient work. And we were a phenomenon. We were the first addiction treatment program to really flourish and expand the treatment options for our alcoholic clients, because there were no significant addictions other than alcohol addiction at the time. And then 1985, by that time, I'd become the head of outpatient programs at the same treatment complex.
Wow.
And we were riding high. 12-step programs, rich psychotherapy, family involvement, which was absolutely unknown anywhere else in the country. It was just beautiful. And then the crack cocaine epidemic hit. And basically the residential program became a total failure. Because within 24 hours, and this was true all over the country, every residential or inpatient program suffered the same exact disaster, treatment-wise. We couldn't keep them in. And so I had a personal interest in nutrition, and I'd actually just hired a nutritionist hoping that a changed diet could make a difference. But we were finding that the cravings for sugar that take over, when people are trying to give up pretty much any drug, and caffeine and nicotine are good examples, really kicks in, and they weren't able to change the diets. So I called a colleague in Minneapolis, Joan Matthews Larson, who wrote the best book ever written on alcoholism, 7 Weeks of Sobriety. And she and I had talked about nutrition. She was very sophisticated. Aha.
Yeah, I was going to say. Yeah.
She was just a lovely, brilliant woman, and very, very successful. And I asked her whether the crack cocaine epidemic had hit her and her treatment program in Minneapolis. And she said, yes, about a year ago. And I said, have you got anything nutritional? Because we've tried everything else. And she said, yes. And she gave me a one-word solution. It was the name of an amino acid, the amino acid that feeds the neurotransmitter that is our natural stimulant. That catecholamine trio, specifically norepinephrine. Mm-hmm. And my new nutritionist was a PhD. She had researched the use of supplements, but not amino acids. I said, do some research. If it's safe, let's start it next week. Mm. The next week, we started it, and that was the end of conventional addiction treatment in my program.
And how did your treatment impact rates change because of this addition?
Oh, we got 100% compliance instead of 100% failure in 24 hours. And starting with the very first person that we tried it on. And should I
share a story?
Reveal the magic word?
Reveal. Tell us the reveal, and tell us and give us a story. It's just like an amazing story too.
Okay. I should say, we may not use this, but I should say that the first cocaine addicts we had were, wealthy snorters. They're, $100 bills, cocaine snorters. They weren't using crack because it wasn't available, and it didn't have the cachet and the glamour. But they were getting into trouble, and they were ending up in our residential treatment program, and then in my outpatient therapy program, and they were all gaining 30 pounds in the first 30 days.
Oh.
Every single one, men and women of every age. Until we found out about the amino acid Tyrosine. They immediately stopped craving sugar, and that did not lead to relapse into cocaine. Mm. It also eliminated their cravings for caffeine. So they had a cup of coffee with breakfast, not coffee all day long, exhausting our supplies and the cook's capacity. So then when crack came in, much worse, much more widespread, much more virulent and powerful. And the first person that we asked to try this amino acid, we were a little bit nervous. But he said, oh, I'm fine with that. I was a bodybuilder before I got into crack, and I was using amino acids all the time.
Wow.
To build muscle, and so I have no fear of it. I'll try anything. He was about to lose his job, his family, everything was on the line, and he'd been addicted for 5 years. So we gave him a bottle of tyrosine and told him to take 2 to 4 capsules, whatever worked. We weren't trialing then. This was years ago. So it was up to him to find the proper potency. We just knew that was the range, 1 to 4 capsules of 500 milligrams. And to take it in between meals, morning, mid-afternoon. And if he had cravings for crack at night, to try it then, but at the lowest dose so that it wouldn't interfere with sleep. That's all we knew to say. And we sent him home. And he had an appointment a week later. So we waited a week. And he came in and said, this is the first time in 5 years that I haven't even craved crack.
Wow.
Let alone used it.
Wow. Wow. Okay. So are you suggesting then that this brain chemistry of people drawn to crack and cocaine is similar to those drawn to caffeine and nicotine?
Oh, especially to caffeine.
Yeah.
And, we're not just talking about coffee anymore. This plant, that does have beneficial properties. We're talking about all kinds of caffeinated, artificial caffeine with no beneficial components. And we're talking about young people carrying a gallon of Coca-Cola loaded with caffeine and sugar, of course, around with them wherever they go.
So sad.
So it's a breeze compared to crack.
To get out of it too? Oh, go ahead.
I have to tell you about the most resistant person we ever met in terms of caffeine addiction. Professional woman in her late 40s comes in. She wants help with overeating, and she is overweight, considerably overweight. And it's out of control, and she's begging for help getting off of sugar. But when we completed the program and reviewed how she was going to operate throughout the day, caffeine, which she never touched without sugar, was, one of the first things that had to go. And so she said, fine, I won't put sugar in it. But she said, I did not come here to get off of coffee. I came here to get off of sugar, starch, caloric junk food. And she was fierce. So the nutritionist runs into my office and says, could you join us? We have a kind of a unique experience. We got a client who came in for help, but she doesn't want help with her caffeine addiction. And I tried to explain to her that caffeine will disrupt her appetite and make it very difficult for her to stabilize her diet. So I waltzed in, and she was in a rage. And I said, look, let's make a deal. You try the nutrient that's going to turn off your craving for caffeine. If it doesn't work, you're going to keep drinking caffeine, because we won't have any other tools for you for that particular thing. And if you're willing to give up the sugar, we can try that with you. We can tell you from the past experience that it doesn't actually work very well. We need to get rid of the caffeine too. So very reluctantly, she took a bottle of tyrosine home along with the other nutrients that she was happy to take to turn off her sugar cravings. And I said, please call us tomorrow.
You
See
knew.
how your morning goes. Because she had said, look, I'm a 5 cup of coffee in the morning.
Oh.
And she says, I set an alarm. I go out and turn on the coffee maker and come back and go to sleep. Then the second alarm goes off. And I have my first cup of coffee. I come back and I go to sleep. The third alarm, I wake up and start, trying to make my day. But I need 2 more to get out the door.
Wow.
So we knew we were up against it, but I had no fear. We'd never failed. I wasn't worried about it. If we could cure a crack addict in 1 week, caffeine, shouldn't have proved too much of a problem, even for her. So, as promised, she called us that afternoon. I answered the phone. The nutritionist was on the other extension. And we said, so tell us, what happened. And she said, I set everything up as usual. Coffee maker ready, 5 alarms ready. And the first alarm went off, and you told me to take 2 Tyrosine when the first alarm went off, but to go ahead and turn on the coffee maker. So that's what I did. And I went back to sleep. The second alarm went off. I went out, and I wasn't interested.
On day one.
On day one.
Julia, that is so crazy. And we're going to tell everyone exactly how to start. I mean, you kind of alluded to it, but I just want to tell anyone out there who's thinking about what would my life look like without caffeine? I'm telling you, unless you've tried it, you won't know exactly which symptoms could be tied to your caffeine. Like she's saying, sugar cravings, you're going up and down all day long, waking up exhausted because you're depleting yourself and doing way too much. You're overriding your body's natural feedback, right? Anxiety, like I said, irritability, aggression, lack of sleep. I mean, these can all get better. I noticed just this like stabilization and just this peace, this groundedness, and this natural energy that just came back that I was like, whoa, I have more energy now than when I can barely peel myself out of bed and need a nap by 3. Like, I don't drink caffeine anymore most days. I do it strategically, but I feel so much more even keel. So Julia, this is a tool that I think can help so many people. Tell us, where exactly do we begin? Have you refined your tools? Where does the person who drinks, 1 or 2 cups of coffee in the morning begin, as opposed to someone who has a more significant habit?
They all start in the same place. So whatever the person comes in with in terms of addiction, she was a good example. She came in for sugar, but it turned out she had a vulnerability in her ability, in her brain's natural capacity to stimulate her. It wasn't just cravings for sugar that were a problem. So what you want to do is to fill out the 5-part symptom questionnaire that allows you to identify which part of the brain is in trouble. If you have deficiency symptoms, for example, if you crave coffee, you typically don't have the energy to operate properly. You may be kind of apathetic, maybe having difficulty concentrating, and discover that caffeine, helps temporarily. At any rate, at the same time, you may find out that there's some other problems that you have in some of the other areas of your brain chemistry, the neurotransmitter chemistry, so that if you've been having a Starbucks every day and all of your neurotransmitters are overfiring, you may need to take as many as 5 amino acids.
Yeah,
it's unusual, but you're going to want to start by trialing. Now, amino trialing is something that we didn't do for the first 10 years. It didn't occur to me. And it was one of my, really late coming brainstorms, because we realized by our own experience and by the reports of our clients that the aminos kicked in right away. This is something that no scientist ever reported. Or that any of our colleagues mentioned, and not that there were many people who were using amino acid therapy clinically at the time. So nobody knew too much about them. But we began to trial people in the office. And what we found was that within a few minutes, the response was right there, because we would have them take the capsule, put it in a little bit of water, swish it around in their mouth so that it would absorb through the mucosa of the mouth, which it does, and then swallow. And we would just sit there and watch them change. And they're, you know, in the case of a tyrosine trialer, the first thing that happens is their eyes light up and they start tracking instead of, you know, looking straight ahead and kind of dead eye. So the first thing to do is trial. And now what we have, since we work through Zoom, is we send people trialing kits. Mm-hmm. So whatever they might need, whatever their paperwork, the questionnaires show us they might need, we just watch them trial. And very quickly they identify, okay, I feel, you know, in a case of a caffeine craver, I feel a little bit more energetic, you know. And I say, well, then we'll say, well, take another one. So trial 2.
Just right away?
Right away. Yeah.
Okay.
As soon as they report, we know it's not going to get better. Whatever they feel right away, that's the way they're going to feel for the next hour or so. So then we go to 2. And we may, you know, only in the case of methamphetamine and crack, cocaine addicts do we typically go to 4 capsules.
Okay. 3
to 4 times a day.
And this is 500 milligram capsules of any tyrosine supplement, or do you have a preferred brand?
No, I don't.
Mm-hmm.
We are very fortunate that the supplement industry seems to be really policing itself so that the quality of just about any brand is the same. The prices vary, but the quality seems to be the same. It doesn't seem to be cut with anything.
Great.
It's all potent. One of the really great inventions of modern time is the nutrients that can be taken, you know, and quickly and, you know, harmlessly used.
Quick question. Yeah. Oh, sorry, go ahead. I was just going to say, how many times a day would you be doing this to start, right?
Oh, how many times a day? We've got a caffeine addict.
Yeah.
When is your last caffeine in the day? Okay, so we're going to substitute tyrosine for the caffeine, but you're also going to have to start eating, you know, a good meal at least 3 times a day and well-spaced. Snack if you need to, but the key is to get enough protein in there. Protein turns off the craving for junk food, or at least cuts the craving. And it starts supplying us with all the 20 aminos that the brain needs, including tyrosine. So it prevents hypoglycemia, which makes us, you know, really crave caffeine when our blood sugar drops. They tell us based on their use. If they only use a lot in the morning and less in the mid-morning and maybe a cup in the afternoon, then, you know, we might go 2 or 3 tyrosine in the morning, 2 in the mid-morning, and 1 to 2 in the afternoon before 3, so that it doesn't interfere with their sleep.
Yeah. Great. And I've heard you say that like missed meals are kind of like a catastrophe for your brain sometimes. And it's just these people who are going and skipping meals like I used to do, trying to suppress my appetite and push through the day so that I wasn't eating so much, who crash and burn, you know, use caffeine and then crash and burn because they're nutrient depleted, end up eating more, feeling worse, eating later. It's just, so these regular meals, it's such an important part of the program. High quality protein, animal proteins, great place to begin, right? Because it contains all of those essential amino acids in the proportions that your body needs. So I love this. Thank you, Julia. How do we know if we've had too much tyrosine, and what can we do if we reach that point?
If we have any adverse, you know, rarely, but occasionally we have somebody who's trialing and they're just taking 1 capsule. They're typically people who tend to be sensitive, but not always. Yeah. Anyway, if they have an adverse, they get a headache maybe, or feel a little jittery instead of energized, we immediately give them something that's also in the trialing kit, which is samples of vitamin C, 1,000 milligrams in a capsule. We empty that into a little glass of water. Again, they swish and swallow, and that clears the liver and eliminates the negative effects, within minutes. So then they can go on to either trial a very small amount of the tyrosine, so like a third of a capsule,
yeah.
Or say, no, I don't want anything to do with that,
That's just too much. And know that I'm a super sensitive person, and I've never had to go above 1 capsule at a time.
Of tyrosine?
Never. Yeah,
okay.
That's all I need. But I'm very sensitive. And so that, everybody has to tailor their own experience. Now, are there contraindications? People who might want to be careful about tyrosine supplementation?
Oh, yes. If you're already taking stimulants, for example, ADD medications, any stimulants of any kind as medication, then you'd have to talk to your physician and see, can you take it at another time away from the medication, which is typically fine with them as long as it's a trial. Mm. And then, and most physicians are perfectly open, because when we say, look, you want to get rid of caffeine, but you're also on stimulating medication, why don't we see if the natural stimulant food, tyrosine, will allow you to pay attention. And maybe you don't need stimulant medication. And the physicians are very, they're overwhelmed with people who need help, and they're perfectly fine. There's no danger to stopping. And so most people don't need stimulant medication either once, they have raised their natural stimulating neurotransmitters with the tyrosine. But there is one other thing. Would you like to go just one step further into the ADD?
Go there, Julia. Yes, that's great. Yes, let's do it.
So attention deficit, if you don't have enough of norepinephrine, it's not only that your energy is low, but your ability to focus, concentrate, be productive mentally. So it's about mental energy as well as physical energy. So the first thing we would do there is to see whether the tyrosine that they're taking for their caffeine problem is going to work if they skip their stimulant, Strattera, Adderall, whatever, Ritalin. And they typically find that it's either totally or partially helpful. So they can either eliminate the dose or drop the dose of the medication. But, a significant number of people with attention deficit are also depleted in GABA, which is our natural tranquilizer. Mm. Now, that doesn't make any sense. They don't want to be slower mentally. But it turns out that GABA does something that they need often badly, and that is it regulates the amount of adrenaline that's circulating. Mm. So they tend to have too much adrenaline circulating, which is what's interfering with their ability to concentrate. Mm. And the GABA, without making them tired, just clears the field of the adrenaline. And so then they have the clarity. And with the tyrosine, they have the energy. And so it's been a wonderful journey to discover this.
Yeah, Julia, and I learned something every time. Like, it's like when the student is ready, the teacher appears. And every time we chat, because I use DLPA, which we've talked about, and tyrosine, and I know GABA, and I've used it throughout the years, but I'm like, I know now that's what I'm needing now. It's so funny when I just like have these insights. I'm like, yes, that's the next one, and that I'm going to really start trying.
At night.
At night. At night specifically, because I think tyrosine works well for me in the day, but I have that kind of type A and I have trouble shutting it off. And so I think that GABA for a period of time is going to help me do that. So Julia, thank you for that. Now, for people trialing these, one last question before we get to nicotine. Are we going to have withdrawals? Typically, when it comes to caffeine, people are like, oh, the headaches. Oh my gosh, there's just these weeks or days where I'm feeling miserable. Is that going to happen?
Very mild.
Okay.
And so, they can take whatever they take for headaches. Nothing fancy is needed.
Okay. And do you drink caffeine yourself?
No, I wanted to, because everybody I knew loved it. And I remember, but, it made me jittery. And then when I was older, I thought, well, maybe I could tolerate it now. And I remember going to a coffee shop and I needed to write some letters. And I had the best time writing those letters. And I drank, maybe 2/3 of the cup of coffee. And I had the best time. So I started doing it every few days. And by the end of a week, the first sip made me jittery. So
you had like a threshold. That's what I've discovered too. Like I can have a random cup of coffee once a week, maybe once a month. I drink decaf coffee because I love the ritual, and decaf doesn't overdo it for me. But
you like the taste?
I do.
Yeah.
You? Yeah.
So look at you. You're really giving me what I call the endorphin smile. Ooh, I like the taste.
I do. Well, we all know I have endorphin depletion if you guys have been watching this series because DLPA was so life-changing, and we have a whole episode about that. But yeah, I do. I love decaf coffee. I love tea, mostly herbal these days. But yeah, every once in a while I can do the caffeine, but I do find that there are repercussions. My husband suffers them mostly because I'm very irritable, but
that's a very important factor in this. People's motivation. I was talking about the lady with the 5 cups of coffee in the morning. She was single. But she was definitely irritable, even midday when we met her,
Yeah, and that brings me back to a question that you've asked many times, that in your book, what does this substance do for you, right? Like it's so individual, and yes, tyrosine is a big piece of that, but like you kind of, when it comes to any substance and your attachment and your relationship to it, like what is it providing? When you know that, it's so much easier to change and just to understand why it's worth changing sometimes, right?
Okay, so you would be a good example.
Yeah.
We've just learned that not only is it stimulating and fun that way, but you like it, you like the taste, you like the feel, you have that beautiful endorphin smile. It triggers your natural painkillers, the endorphins, our joy chemistry. And so, when we get people reporting that, we're looking for that, and usually their amino acid therapy chart, the neurotransmitter deficiency symptoms will show that. They have on a scale of 1 to 10, they're 8 to 10 on feeling overly sad and maybe a little lonely, even though they've got a good family and whatever, teary, and looking for pleasure, in inappropriate places.
Yeah. So like what you're saying is it might be more than one. It might be more than tyrosine. It might be more than that stimulation, that excitement you're looking for. It could be these endorphins too. So love that. Thank you, Julia. Now let's pivot. Nicotine. Okay. This is one of the hardest addictions out there. And I know it because I was a pack-a-day smoker for years and years. And it took a lot of work for me to cut this out when I was white knuckling it because I didn't know about you yet. But can you tell us, like, where do people with nicotine begin? Is it different? How is it different?
Well, let me start with my experience with smokers.
Yeah.
First of all, I was the director of outpatient programs for many years in an addiction treatment complex. And so I had relationships with people who were coming out of residential treatment, or they'd come to me and I would say, look, I can get you started, but I want you to go residential so that you'll have a lot of support and no, nothing drawing you back for that period of time. And I can promise you that by the time you leave, the aminos will have kicked in. You will have learned a lot. You will have been comfortably withdrawn from whatever, they were consuming. And it worked well. We talked to them maybe a half an hour a week to make sure that the amino dosing was right before they left. And so routinely, the owners of the treatment programs would say, your people do better than anybody else.
Wow.
Okay. Why they didn't ask us to help them, provide this to the other people, that's another topic which I hope we'll talk about, which is relapse. Why are relapse rates just getting worse and worse and worse? And what's the motivation behind it? This treatment is available. Why hasn't it been used? And I've got some really disturbing answers, but very firm ones. So we'll go into that. But what I wanted to get to was there wasn't a single treatment program that I ever worked with who asked people to stop smoking or drinking caffeine. And what that tells us is how addictive those substances are.
Yeah.
And the fact that they're legal, and of course sugar, no limit on that either. So what they would do, is have a and what they're still doing, even the best programs that are providing excellent nutritional care, and there aren't very many of them. But as a matter of fact, I mentioned the best one in the country in the guidebook that I completed just 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
They designate an area outside, and people can go at certain times and they smoke. And as a matter of fact, I was talking to the head nutritionist, who's brilliant at bridging the gaps. It's in Winchester, Virginia. Gorgeous program. And she said, well, what do you do with nicotine addicts? And I said, well, here's what I learned. They have, the least motivation and the hardest time motivating themselves, even when they are ill, because of their smoking, to stop. So we could say, it's one of the most addictive drugs, maybe the most addictive drug. So what did we find? Well, we ran into that too. It was an outpatient, so there were fewer smokers. But I hired a new counselor who was trained as a psychotherapist, but came from an alcoholic family. She was very interested in working in addiction, and she had been trained as a hypnotherapist. And so this topic came up, and I knew that people used hypnotherapy to try and get off of various, bad habits. But I didn't know very much about it. And it wasn't something that was ever taught in the clinical psychology programs that I attended. So I asked her, have you used hypnotherapy for tobacco cessation? And she said, all the time. She said, as somebody new, that's the way I advertise myself. And there are always a lot of people, I get customers because it works so well. And here's the way hypnotherapy has learned to use it for tobacco cessation. There's an initial meeting to determine a date.
Okay.
It's not tomorrow. It's a week from now, 2 weeks from now. If it's a week from now, great. They inform us. We start them on the aminos immediately to build up their neurotransmitters after we figure out which neurotransmitters is their nicotine impacting. What's the pleasure in this? What's the catch? What's the addictor? What are the addictors? There's usually more than one. So then we find out what they use tobacco for. Sometimes it's all of the things I mentioned earlier. pleasure, energy, mental clarity, stimulation, calming down, getting to sleep, waking up. And so we give them quite a few aminos, depending on how many neurotransmitter depletions they have. Mm-hmm. But it's very easy for them to identify it through this questionnaire. And then we trial, and they see which ones they like, and they figure out, while they're still smoking, they figure out, a dosing and how often. And then we reach the target date. And by that time, their cravings have really reduced. And so they're not as afraid, but also without the hypnotherapy, they wouldn't even have started to try. I mean, it's so black and white. No, I am not ready for that.
So you find that hypnotherapy proceeds, and then you work with people, you set a date, and you replete them. You take the quiz, and then you replete their neurotransmitters, and then you quit after that. So it's a multiple stage process. I love that. Are there specific neurotransmitters that you see over and over? Like, which supplements are usually the ones that people addicted to nicotine are using?
Well, the truth is that it's not unusual for them to need all five,
Yeah.
Because it's a complex drug. It's been worked over by the industry. Yeah. It's got the sugar. So, it's pleasurable. Okay, we need an amino that will restore the endorphin levels. It's stimulating. Okay, we need the tyrosine.
Yep.
To raise the energy. It's calming and tranquilizing. Okay, we'll give them GABA, which is, our natural tranquilizer. It picks them up if they haven't had anything to eat and they're going into a hypoglycemic slump. Yep. Okay. There's an amino acid called glutamine that does the same thing. Quick, only naturally and healthfully. So, we may give them the whole armamentarium. I was thinking, what is an image that would help people understand this? And I was thinking about a guitar, which has 5 strings. Maybe it has 6 strings, but, let's just pretend it has 5 strings. So each string has a different sound, and each one is lovely. And then you combine them in all these ways, and that's what our sense of natural well-being should be. All of them perfectly tuned and working together as needed.
Yeah. And that's what I've found too. Like, I was initially drawn to tryptophan. Great. I reached my max. And then, I'm really liking DLPA. Okay, that's been great for me. Tyrosine is great at other times. Now I'm bringing in the GABA, and I realize my brain, it needs all of them. And so you probably start with all of them. You take the quiz, they start with all of them. And at what point, people have asked this, when do you just take an amino acid supplement, like a whole amino acid supplement? How is that experience going to be different from this one where you take the quiz and you identify your deficiencies and you take perhaps higher targeted doses? Can you talk about the difference there?
Yeah, let's pause for a second and talk about what you're suggesting. Well, why don't they take a supplement that has all 20 of the aminos in it? And they could do that, and there are 2 ways. One doesn't take effect immediately, and that's something like whey protein, which is an animal-based powder that has quite a bit of all of the aminos. Mm-hmm. They also use the only supplement that I know of that's free form, which means it takes effect immediately. When you eat protein, it's composed of amino acids, but the bonds between them have to be broken in order for them to circulate and do what they need to do all throughout the body. When we take a single amino acid like tyrosine, there are no bonds. It's going right where it needs to go. And there's only one company that I know that makes a complete amino blend that's free-form, that doesn't have any bonds, that goes to work immediately. It's called Total Amino Solutions. I helped design it, but I'm no part of the company. And it's a marvelous product that we started using for our pregnant clients who can't take the individuals because it might disrupt the kind of balance needed by the developing fetus. And they notice it. But the impact of, a full capsule of one amino acid compared to the amount in a few of these mixed amino capsules is significant. So they really notice it, but they're getting like a third of the benefit. But even a third is so helpful to them.
Yeah.
So, but it doesn't have the direct potency for dealing with really serious cravings, like the ones for nicotine. There is one other nutrient that I don't want to leave out. And one of my trainees, PhD, trained in hypnotherapy, ran smoking cessation groups in Nevada where smoking, it's legal everywhere, indoors and outdoors and whatever. She ran groups for years. And with the hypnotherapy alone, she had a 40% success rate. In other words, by the end of the year, 40% had not used and not gone back to use, and her thing was, just a few weeks long, but it held for a year. So she was happy with that, but not overjoyed. And then she found out about a product a nutrient that is specifically used for withdrawal, for easing withdrawal symptoms. It's called NAD. She added NAD to their protocol. And she'd already, first she added the aminos. It went from 40% to 80%. Then she added NAD and it went up to 90% compliance.
Wow.
Yeah. So if we run into somebody who has just terrible withdrawal and we're not getting anywhere with high dose vitamin C, which we love, and maybe we're doing AccuDetox, needles in the opiate ear point, we've almost never had to do either one. But if we run into trouble and the person is relapsing on smoking, then we would not hesitate for a second to give them NAD.
Is that oral? Like, are you taking like NAD? Yeah.
So it's been used IV for many, many years, decades that I know of, very, very effectively for withdrawal from every substance you can imagine. Opiates, benzos, 6 days on NAD, IV infusions, and it's over.
Wow.
And the comfort level is significant on the first day. So I've known about it. It wasn't available in the United States. Now it is. There are lots of naturopaths and other people who provide intravenous nutrition who provide NAD. So it's an option for anybody who wants to get some support from whatever they're withdrawing from. But one of the pioneers in the use of amino acids therapeutically developed an oral form, and it's enteric coated. That means it doesn't break down in the stomach. Turns out that NAD, as wonderful as it is destroyed by hydrochloric acid in the stomach. So this takes effect quickly, but only in the mouth and in the small intestine. The stomach will kill it. So the company called Monteith, it's very pricey, but it's for detox. It's not, forever. There's a company called Source Naturals that makes great amino products and always has, along with other kinds of products. It's local to me. Anyway, they have a chewable form that will absorb through the mouth. So and smokers love that because it's oral, So we're hopeful that somewhere between those two, people won't have to look for intravenous NAD. And as I say, we've almost never needed to even use that.
Wow, I love this. Okay, so I'm just going to give a high-level overview, and then we have 3 last questions for you. So if you're a caffeine addict who wants to cut down, tyrosine is likely going to be very helpful, right? Pretty straightforward. When you would be drinking your coffee, you can substitute tyrosine. Of course, if you're taking stimulant medications, please be very careful. Consult with your doctor. This might
Well,
also help. Oh, go ahead.
let me expand. You asked earlier, what about, precautionary
Yeah.
considerations? Is there somebody who shouldn't take? Yeah. There's a whole list of precautions that we've developed so that whatever the amino is that you're, considering, you can look on the list and see what are the precautions for that. So, although tyrosine, it's in food, it is stimulating. And if there's any reason, in terms of medication or health conditions that would, make it questionable, you'll know in advance. And that list of precautions for all of the aminos, I've included in that guidebook. It's only 20 pages, but I've packed it in with as much practical detail as I could so that people, have a tool that they can refer to.
I love it. And I've looked through it. It's, your nutritional guidebook for recovery. Yeah, I'm going to put that in the description. So look for all contraindications there. And if you're a nicotine addict or person using nicotine, you'll want to identify what that nicotine is doing for you. Like you said, giving you a break, calming you down, stimulating you, suppressing your appetite. And use the guidebook again, which has the list of symptoms that can help you identify what exactly it's doing. And then you'll probably cater a whole individualized program. You might need more than one individual amino acid. Julia can work with you if you want to. Again, I'll put her details in the link below or in the description below. And know that also you might bring in hypnotherapy. There might be, high dose vitamin C and oral NAD, like she just talked about, for withdrawals and for detoxification. And then the foundation will be a diet where you have 2 to 3 meals with high quality protein at every single meal so that we're repleting it. And then maybe once you get off your individualized program, maybe you try the total amino solution, right? Then you continue to replete, or maybe you're pregnant. So I just wanted to give everybody a high level overview. Just how long do we continue this amino acid supplementation for caffeine, nicotine, and other substances?
Thank you. I get carried away in getting people started and, the miraculous early response. But so people basically continue to be guided by their scores on the 5-part questionnaire. The questionnaires, the Neurotransmitter Deficiency Symptom Questionnaire. So as their scores go down, they can reduce their doses. And if their scores go back up, they go back up on the dose. They just follow their own healing process according to their symptoms. And if at any time they realize that they're actually having a negative, well, they can stop altogether and then resume if their symptoms come back. Mm-hmm. So let's say they're a benzo addict and they're not in withdrawal anymore. They're relaxed, and they start getting a headache or feeling overly tired when they take GABA or one of the other calming aminos that we use for benzo detox and withdrawal and recovery. They stop. The symptom goes away, typically within hours, and the next day they start monitoring themselves and see if they still need any,
Yeah.
Their symptoms scores are way down, and maybe they try a little bit if they're feeling a little tense and see whether a half a dose or a quarter of a dose could still be needed. But most people who are heavily addicted, especially if they have it in the family, they could need it for up to a year.
Okay.
With food addiction, as we're going to find out, the next episode, it's more likely 12 weeks. But we're talking about reducing the dose as you no longer need such a high dose.
Yeah.
As your scores go down, This is not a lifetime maintenance. This is not a lifetime expense. This is a temporary repair job, but it all depends on eating well. Getting enough protein, amino acids in your diet so that you don't need them permanently from supplements.
I love it. I love it. And for nicotine and caffeine, what's the time frame that you see typically for supplementation?
Oh, that can go up to 12 weeks or longer with nicotine.
Okay. And would you say that you would do you're targeted for 12 weeks or a year of more serious drugs? Would you then start supplementing with total amino solution? Or do you think if you can cultivate the habit of 3 daily eating events of protein, that you wouldn't need the supplement?
We typically find that people don't need the supplement when they eat properly. And there are so many things in food besides amino acids that they need so badly because they've inevitably been poorly nourished for a long time. One of the things that I may have mentioned is that opiate addicts in particular are often unable to eat.
Yeah.
It's kind of like meth addicts, you know?
Yep.
And so they are formally diagnosed with Kwashiorkor syndrome, which is a life-threatening protein malnutrition status.
Do they get the bellies like they sometimes?
Yes.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. I didn't know that. Okay. So this is not a lifetime thing. Some people think, oh, it's just another expensive supplement. No, this is a temporary, like
repair job
that just helps to replenish and to put your brain on the path that it was designed to be on, that so many of us have had taken from us, unfortunately, because of our environment and maybe our genetics. So thank you, Julia. That's so helpful.
Great. So if people quit because they just get tired of it and then their cravings come back, don't worry. Go back and just taper more slowly. Yeah. It can't fail, really.
Yeah. And what I do too is like, I don't take aminos individually most days anymore. But hey, if I've got a talk coming up, you know, I might use a little tyrosine. If I have a more strenuous morning with my son, okay, maybe tyrosine comes out for that period of time. So I use them on an individual basis too, just to kind of give my brain a little boost or what it might be needing. And then sometimes GABA comes in at night if I had a hard day and I need a little winding down. So it's a neat way. You don't have to use them forever, but you can use them once you learn what your brain might be needing in key moments, which I think is also a powerful tool.
That's a very good point because we don't really know what we're dealing with when we're talking about mass malnutrition. You know, what does it take to restore, you know, different nutrients are going to be restored at different paces and maybe some will miss.
We need to worry about stress reduction or sleep or any other dietary factors you think that you see coming up again and again with people using caffeine or nicotine.
Well, eating enough is the real challenge, you know, and high quality food. And in order to eat high quality food, you have to have a taste for it. It has to taste as good or better than the foods that are designed to addict us because they're so, you know, so well designed to impact our neurotransmitters. The beauty of the amino acid therapy is that the aminos turn off cravings for junk food at the same time as they turn off cravings for alcohol and drugs. Yeah. Or addictive behaviors. So you don't have to fight yourself. And if food addiction is a major problem, and it is something that we're going to devote an entire episode to because it is more deadly than all other addictive substances combined.
Isn't it crazy? Yeah, 67% of our children's calories today coming from ultra-processed food and around 58% for adults. How can our brains have what it needs? They don't.
No, it gets a third of every brain on 67% junk food gets a third of what it needs. Yeah. So we're a third as happy and satisfied and apt to eat well. It's tragic, but we've got the answer.
Yes. Yes, yes. And even we talked about in that last episode that Kennedy's team reached out to you because addiction solutions are not available right now. People are suffering and they're struggling and they're looking to you, Julia. So,
well, it is interesting. You know, I think everyone knows it's Secretary Kennedy is a recovering addict. Well, his addiction recovery was spiritual. But unlike so many people who are in recovery for many years, I admire him because he's been actively looking for alternatives for people for whom the 12 steps and the spiritual approach just isn't working.
Yeah.
And that's 9 out of 10 people who go to 12-step programs.
But
he sent a letter out at the end of June this year asking the country for help in identifying these kinds of, effective alternatives for addiction recovery. And he's very, very clear on the corruption and ineptness of and ineffectiveness of all current approaches, whether they're government funded, which are actually better quality now than the privately funded ones. They're just not doing the job. And so I am scheduled to meet with the acting head of the this new addiction recovery initiative, $700 million. And they've seen evidence about the amino acids, and they're very, very interested. And I'm really hopeful that it will be integrated into a national program where we'll get to see quickly, does it work or not? I'm telling you, it works within minutes. So after a few months, we see people, very, very different than a few months in conventional recovery.
That's amazing. And so what I want people to know is that it's not a failing on your part, right? This is an environment that is set up, unfortunately, to have us depleted in these brain chemicals. And it is some of us, in addition, born with these genetic tendencies or born from, decades or generations of addicts themselves who, again, were getting depleted. So there's hope. Julia's got the hope. She's got the recipe. We just shared the recipe. So before we get to the 2 questions people had, is there anything you want to tell people about how much hope they should have, or what you've seen? Or is there anyone with family members who are struggling? Let us know your message for them if you have one.
I'm glad you brought up family members because, of course, there are more of them than there are addicts suffering the impact of addiction. And it can get old. And because addiction has no cure. And it is, it's terrible to live with someone who's no longer themselves. And so one of the things we find about family members is that they typically come from families where there is alcoholism in the family. So they too have this gene. And so they're vulnerable emotionally. And they easily become negative and angry and depressed and start overeating, if they already aren't. So they are often the first people that we take care of because they call us and they say, my husband, my son, my brother, my sister, whatever, my aunt. And we say, why don't you come in yourself? You'll get a much better idea of why this works. You'll be much more convincing, and you're going to feel better yourself. Mm-hmm. And they do, and their attitude towards the whole situation changes. And there's not the blame, there's not the contempt, the anger, and their family members typically come in too.
Wow. Yeah. Such an important consideration. So there's hope. There's hope for people using nicotine, people using caffeine, people using more serious drugs, and the families and the communities that just embrace them. So thank you, Julia, for all of that. And you can connect with her. I'm going to put the Nutritional Recovery Guidebook down in the description, as we've stated. And then we're going to cover 2 of your questions, because you have had so many questions, and we're going to have a food addiction episode coming next. So if you have questions about the food addiction episode, or how to stop having sugar, or whatever food that you are currently addicted to, let us know in the comments below, and we will answer them just like we're about to answer these. But the first thing I wanted you to touch on before we go is Kratom and 7-OH addiction. I've had a lot of people reaching out. Like I said, many friends. We were on the phone the other day and I counted. I thought I had one friend. I had five friends who were impacted by Kratom. And so can you talk about this? Where should people start with this? What are some amino acids that might help?
Well, Kratom is, potential tragedy of huge proportions, because it comes on initially for a lot of people as a stimulant, like a really nice and longer lasting caffeine, or stronger even, but with the soft edge. And so people will use it for that. And if they want to stop using at that point, the tyrosine and the things that we've talked about already are very effective. But if they proceed into, and 7-OH is already it's a very potent substance. So whatever form of kratom you're using, if it turns from a mildly stimulating substance into a definite painkiller, an endorphin booster, that wonderful euphoric feeling, then we need to give it all of the things that we would give to somebody on heroin or fentanyl, any of the other opiates or opioids that affect our natural endorphins, our natural pleasure chemistry. It's a terribly difficult drug to get off of, but we not only have the amino acids, we have NAD, and this is a really good example of a nasty addictor that we need extra help with in terms of withdrawal.
Good call. Okay, great. And what about, last question, sex addiction? People are also wondering about sex addiction.
There is nothing more obvious in terms of pleasure than what somebody's looking for with sex addiction. I had a client come in who was addicted to cannabis, and he had gotten involved with the 12-step program, Marijuana Addicts Anonymous, MAA, and have really a great experience with that, and had become a leader in that community. But he was in our area, and everybody's sort of health oriented around here, and so he was looking into what else he could do nutritionally, but he wasn't afraid of relapse. So we gave him some suggestions, but he was supposed to come back, and when he came back, instead of being with his wife, he was alone. And he was very very self-conscious, really ashamed of himself, and he admitted that he was a pornography addict, and that had not stopped even when his cravings for cannabis had eased up, and he was able to stop that. He hadn't been able to stop the pornography. So I told him what I'm going to tell you, that anyone who has an addiction that is essentially attacking their own natural pleasure chemistry, the endorphin chemistry, whether it's kratom, heroin, or what are we talking about now?
Sex. How do you forget about that, Julia?
You too will experience.
Yeah, I guess you have enough aminos. You have all the aminos and the endorphins. This is evidence. Okay.
We were, delighted to be able to tell him, this is not your fault. It's not a sign of, degeneracy. It's a sign of inability to generate your own natural levels of pleasure.
Yeah.
And we can fix that. And so we told him about the 2 amino acids that we use. And so these are the 2 that we would use, whether it's Kratom or another opiate or opioid, or if it's sex addiction, which is, where the pleasure component is really at the fore. So there are 2 forms of this particular amino acid. A form that's a little bit stimulating as well as pleasurable, and is sometimes too stimulating for some people, is called D-L-phenylalanine. So it's 2 forms of the amino acid phenylalanine combined. For those who need a less stimulating version of this amino acid, D-phenylalanine by itself, an unusual form of phenylalanine, is available. And between the 2, here's where trialing comes in. You trial the DLPA, which is much more readily available and less expensive. If that doesn't work, you don't like it, then you get the DPA. And they're both in the trialing kit because we've learned, that we can't predict which one is going to work best for a particular person. But so we told him he said, the DLPA sounds better for me because I'm a little bit low, and I could use to cut my coffee intake down anyway, And so the next week we had a phone follow-up with him. And in those days we were seeing people in person. And so he called us the next week and we asked him how he was doing. And he said, I threw all the stuff away. And I'm not missing it.
It's just so amazing, Julia. Your work for me is one of the most important things I've ever had the privilege of sharing. So thank you. It just helps us realize we deserve to feel good, right? And if we don't, we also deserve the tools to know how to help ourselves feel good. And that's what you're doing, Julia. I think so many people walk around in these brains and bodies that they don't understand. They don't understand why they're feeling sad or they're addicted to things or, they can't stop doing these, self-harming behaviors. But there's a reason. And there's a biochemical reason. And Julia, thank you for your continuous joy and passion around this topic. Is there anything else you want to tell people out there before we close this conversation? I'm just going to give you an opportunity, but also please keep your comments coming, your comments and your questions. I intend to expose you to as much of Julia as possible and just to get her knowledge out there. So keep the comments and questions coming. We're going to do the next episode all about food addiction. And Julia, it's your turn right now. What do you think?
I just want to say one thing about those comments.
Yeah.
They have been fascinating. And I sent an email to Autumn last week saying, I'm addicted to responding to the comments.
You need connection, right? I don't know. Is it connection? I don't know, Julie. What amino does that mean you need?
I think it's missing. I've become an administrator and a writer and an instructor, and, having direct contact with people who need me, it has really filled something I didn't realize I was missing.
That's amazing, Julia. And you're helping so many people. Like I said, we're going to do more of these episodes. There's about 100,000 views on the drug addiction episode and, so many on our depression or you're not depressed, you're nutrient depleted episode. So much more to come. So keep sharing, keep commenting, and make sure that you subscribe so you see these videos coming out when they do, because I know a lot of you are listening but not yet subscribed. So subscribe so you don't miss Julia and her remarkable series on food addiction next. Thanks for watching.